Great Katanas were one of the most exciting additions in Shadow of the Erdtree. So in my quest to find the best weapon in the lands between, I grabbed one of them and did a run that once again had me thinking of changing up my scoring methodology. Rakshasa's Great Katana is actually one of the tougher weapons to get in Shadow of the Erdtree, only available after killing one of the most powerful mini-bosses in the DLC. So the plan for this run was to try and figure out a way to get it early that anyone could do, regardless of skill. So the first step is getting to the DLC, and for early DLC, my recommendation, as always, is Bloodhound's Fang. I can't really see any other route beating this, but since I'll never find out if I just do that on every run, I decided to use the Uchi to get to the DLC. As always, there's a link to the idiot-proof Bloodhound's route in the description. So after following my standard setup guide, grabbing both the Somber and Smithing Stones for this run, head to Lena's Rise in Caelid to cheese the cavalry, then to Fort Fareth to kill the Sleeping Grail with a foul foot for some levels. Now to Mount Gelmir for Golden Vow. To Fort Gale in Caelid for Flame Grant Me Strength, which we're going to use early on in the run. Then to the Frenzy Flame Tower for the Howl of Shabriri, which we're going to use in the mid to late game. Ride into the Liurnia Lake just north of the Blood Church to kill the Scarab for Blood Flame Blade. For our early DLC talisman, we have two good options. Either go rescue Pot Boy, then do the unspeakable, or if you have a heart, head down into the High Road Cave for the Blue Dancer Charm. And as always, to the Abandoned Cave in Caelid to grab the Golden Scarab to switch to after fights for extra runes. For our Physic early on, south from the Ball Prawn Shack for the Dex tier. And jump down the cliffs to the south of the Church of Pilgrimage in Weeping for the Faith tier. Then kill Banal at the Warmaster Shack before we head to Volcano Manor so we can buy Assassin's Gambit later on. Now for Noble. Alright, gotta try not to fuck it up this week. Then to Caelid for Radahn. And if you're used to doing early DLC routes with Bloodhound's Fang, you'll notice how good the plus 16 Uchi feels here in comparison to the plus 9 Fang. It's a guaranteed phase 1 kill either way, but the underdog feels so much more impressive. Ride to the Blood Church in Weeping to see the Weirdo, then do his questline for early access to the palace. And let's see how the Uchi holds up for an early Moog. Oh, I broke his AI. I don't think I've seen that before on Mo. He lulled me into a full sense of security. It wasn't a glitch, it was a strat. I'll be honest, I think the deaths here were more to do with my lack of caffeine that morning, rather than the Uchi being measurably worse for this fight. I'd still stick with Bloodhounds unless you know the fight really well though, because of the posture damage and stance breaks you'll get. So with the DLC accessed, it's time to ride around and grab some levels and some bits. While you follow my DLC setup guide, stop by the Scorch Ruins for the Blade of Mercy, and the Templetown Ruins for the two-handed sword talisman. Now into the back of the Shadow Keep to make our way up to Messmer, grabbing the fragments along the way. Then out the west side to grab the 3 extra fragments in the ancient ruins of Rao. Don't bother with the small hippo we usually kill here, as we've only got a plus 16. Now time to go find Rakshasa. So back to the Shadow Keep and down through the secret area into the Recluse's River. Lighting the downstream Grace, then dropping down to the Mausoleum. I won't lie, there was a tiny part of me that was still coping that a plus 16 Uchi would be fine and I wouldn't have to make another build for this fight. Alright, that's not gonna work. So back to Stormvale to kill Margit. Run through Stormvale, dodging all the arrows perfectly, and into the room with the grafted scion to take a right, opening up the Stone Sword Keygate and grabbing the Iron Wet Blade from the armoury. Then to Fort Fareth for the 7s and 8s, on top of the mound nearby. Now back to the DLC for some smithing stones. The Fort of Reprimand has some 7s up at the top, and 5s and 6s in the cellar. Then to the Fog Rift Fort for more 7s. Then to the Lava Forge intake and the Ruined Forge of Starfall Past for a supermarket sweep of all the smithing stones within them. I needed more because I'd leveled up the Uchi, so I had to go to Telu's Forge as well. But if you got here with Bloodhound's Fang, this won't be necessary. The final 8s are by the boats in the Shadow Keep. For the Ash of War, to the Knights Cavalry at the Bellum Church for Giant Hunt. With everything set up, to the West Weeping Merchant to buy a Soul's Legend. Level up the Zweihander to max and infuse it with Giant Hunt. And let's see what this does to Rakshasa. With our weapon and fashion secured, the next question was what to do with it. Because the Great Katana has a unique Ash of War, my instinct was to try and build around that. So I did Millicent's questline up to Windmill Apostle, so I could grab the prosthesis. Then down into the Stillwater Cave for the winged sword, to see how much we can bully Draconic. Alright, sit rep. I glanced at the other monitor for like 2 seconds and now I'm stuck in a tree. Thank you, mate. When you're out of the tree, head to Draconic and spam L2 to see how the same setup we used for the Blades of Rana is for the Great Katana. So he got in a couple of attacks there, and I think this sword could do more. So I went to Kaled to grab the Stone Barbed here, then went to the Lux Ruins to bully the Demi-Human Queen for the Ritual Sword Talisman. And finally back to Limgrave for the Spike Crack Tear and the Axe Talisman. Head through Stormvale, killing the Avatar for the Lord's Rune. For Godfrey, rolling attacks and R1s deal serious damage and are very safe throughout. But if you want to find space for charges, one chargy does about 1/3 of his health bar. And for Morgott, a weapon half the size puts in the same performance as the Giant Crusher. Now, if you were thinking that I wasn't exactly fair on the Weed Cutter version of this build, congratulations, you're a nerd. Because yes, Draconic is strong against Slash, but Fire Giant is weak to it. And the consecutive hit build does work pretty well here. Nothing silly, but very nearly enough for a scripted Fire Giant. I think the normal moveset is definitely the way to go on this build though, so we'll do that from now on. For duo, Slate Pot strats, and this is incredibly close to a 1 cycle. Especially as I probably could have got another R1 on Apostle. As we now have enough faith for Howl of Shabriri, Physic Tears from here on in are the Stone Barb and Spike Cracked. For Beast, get him down to about 80% health, then let him chill for a bit to let his posture recover. And for Malekith, for Godfrey, same as Beast. Get him down to 80% health, then let his posture recover before you get stuck in with R1s only for the remainder of Phase 1 to build posture. For Elden Beast, I whiffed the final attack at the opening, but it wouldn't have bought a stagger anyway. What does bring a stagger though, is pretty much any opportunity afterwards. I killed him before he could even start Elden Stars, but even if he does it earlier for you, there's no chance you won't stagger him with charges before he's done casting it. There is almost no danger in this fight with this setup. And the same is true with Plassey. As is always my strat, charges between the lightning, but the difference with the Great Katana is that there is almost no chance of getting hit during it. Even with the best weapons we've covered so far, Plassey almost always makes it to the big lightning attack at the end. Not with this sword though. Before heading to the DLC, I went back to Castle Sol to kill Nile to unlock everything for later. One shot both summons, single riposte on Nile, then wait for the big tornado. So for Gaius, play along and guess when he's going to stagger. If, like me, you're not a Great Katana nerd, the posture damage you get from this thing, even taking Stone Barb into account, is very surprising and hilariously good for frantic fights like Gaius. when I went down into the fissure for Putrescent Night, I got another first in this series. For Romina, we have a weapon that actually matches the Uchi for this fight, and might even be slightly better. This is possibly the most chilled Romina fight I've ever had. Now for Mesmer. And while this was a pretty scrappy first attempt where I missed a crucial attack that would have made this fight so much more predictable, I didn't want to redo it for reasons that we're going to talk about later on. For Radahn, this is absolutely as good as it gets. This was not just a first try, but like I said about the Uchi, a first try that I was super confident of, even on a boss where I expect a few attempts of pain with the best weapons. On a fight where it's so important to play it safe, you know you have a really good build when you're cocky enough to get really greedy with attacks. Forget to level up, then head into one of the worst parts of the game with 600k on you. A great weapon doesn't make jewelry any less terrible, but at least it doesn't last long. So what's the verdict on Rakshasas then? While the damage isn't quite as scary as some of the other weapons we've looked at so far in this series, with the output and DPS scores not being anything to write home about. Ease of use would easily be a 9, were it not for the 10% extra damage you take while wielding this katana. This unfortunately brings it down to an unremarkable 7.5. The adaptability and bullyability scores are where it shines. A perfect score for adaptability with slash damage, pierce damage, bleed, and an Ash of War that stunlocks all NPCs to death, all contributing to a weapon that is brilliant for everything. For bullyability, the same score as the Starfist and Iron Balls is deliberate and deserved. The thing is though, and what I fear my current leaderboard isn't quite showing, if you told me I had to do a deathless run of Elden Ring this week, but I could start the game with any weapon I've covered so far in this series, I think I'd pick this, even with its 10% debuff. I've done countless runs of Elden Ring with the Starfist and the Iron Balls, and the Uchi has been a part of the furniture of my builds since the game released. But not even halfway through my first playthrough with a Great Katana, this thing felt just as comfy as the aforementioned, but with all of the strengths of both and basically none of the weaknesses. It is safe to go for a charged R2 on consort with the Fire Knight's Greatsword, but there is always a slight feeling of panic whenever you do. With Rakshasas, there's not. In fact, as you saw earlier on that fight, there's an optimism that you might even have room for an R1 afterwards. You saw me miss attacks on Mesmer and Midra earlier, which for tidy or hitless strats in either of those would be a big issue with a lot of swords. With this though, I have the same carefree attitude I'd have with the Starfist. With this damage and posture DPS, I know I can control the fight, so RNG and playing perfectly becomes so much less important. If you have a basic knowledge of the bosses in this game, and you want to do a run where you don't have to worry about any fight, this is the weapon for you. And I'm not sure my scores for it reflect that, or how to make them. I've got a couple of ideas, so I may mess around with the scoring over the next week to see if I can find a way of illustrating this. I'm open to ideas if there's something you want to suggest. For now though, another week of deleted health bars and another weapon on the list. If you try this build, please let me know how you get on in the comments. As always, thanks for watching. See you soon.